Take it away.
Well, thank you and welcome to our show, Direct Line. And I'm on with Don Irvine, but our guest is David Almasi, who is with the National Center for Public Policy Research. But there's actually a long history that Don, and you and the two of you go back quite a while. Don, what's the background there?
That's true. David's going to have to actually give us a more pinpointed date, but I mean, we go back to Dave probably when you were just out of college or thereabouts,
Yep.
and your wife also was with us. Part
Yep.
of the AIM team. So I'd go back 30 plus years.
1989 to about 1991, and Nancy was there in 90 and maybe into 91.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a kind of the double history that goes back. So one of the guys who actually stuck around DC too.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
good.
you for getting me started.
That's a good thing. We've got a lot of good people who have started with AIM over the years, or have interned there, or done various things for them. So tell us a little bit about what you right now. You're with National Center for Public Policy Research. What have you guys been up to?
Sure. Well, before AIM, actually, back in 1987, I was an intern at the National Center for Public Policy Research, and then 10 years after that, went back full time and have been there since 1997. Currently the vice president and dealing with a lot of our programs, but I think the one in particular you guys want to talk about tonight is our free enterprise project. And that was set up quite a while ago, but it's been very active in the last 10 years. It is the largest and most active shareholder activist group within the conservative movement, which means we go into battle, I guess you'd say, with corporate interests that should be on our side, should be should be embracing free enterprise, but unfortunately are going the woke way and have been the muscle essentially for the liberal movement, for the left-wing movement that's been pushing our culture and our economics the last couple of years.
And for example, I noticed that you guys have done some work focusing on AT&T, and they don't like to talk about it, but it's worth remembering or reminding people that AT&T, because of their purchase of Time Warner, they own CNN, and so they're responsible. So what have you been doing there?
Well, one thing is they may have it on the chopping block now, because AT&T has a lot of debt, and CNN is considered to be an asset that they could potentially spin off and try to make some money to pay down that debt. But we've been active in going after the media for a number of years, and in fact, one of the things that I'm grateful for to AIM is when we decided to go after the Washington Post for their abortion coverage. We actually used AIM's shares to go that year, and it was interesting that Don Graham, when he saw me sitting there and knew why I was there, he said, "Oh, the torch has been passed," because it was Reed Irvine who was a staple at those meetings for year after year. So in many ways, some of the stuff that we're doing is stuff that Reed Irvine had done for years with media companies. But in the case of CNN, both when Time Warner was its own company and since it's been subsumed by AT&T, we have been going to the AT&T meetings, and that's kind of hard to thread the needle on that one, because AT&T doesn't have the usual process for us to interact with the management, but we have been able to bring up issues such as their software programs that were keeping their internet software that was keeping advertising from companies like Breitbart and other conservative interests from getting out there, and then with CNN, the bias within the network. And I know when I was there at the Time Warner meeting in 2017, we got the CEO at the time to pledge to redouble his efforts, as he said, to have a more independent network, to have have it be less biased. And soon after that, that was when Anthony Scaramucci was slighted by the network, by some of the producers, and those producers ended up getting fired. So hopefully that meant we made a difference there. And in the case of that software, we did get AT&T to open the ability for conservative groups again to be able to use it. So we felt that we also made an impact there just by having conversations with the CEO in public, or at least on record.
That on record obviously makes a huge difference because corporate directors corporate executives are, how shall I say, at their most vulnerable or at their most sensitive, right at the shareholder meetings or
Exactly.
right beforehand.
That's why it's important that not just the Free Enterprise Project be in this fight. Anybody actually can do this. If you are a shareholder in a corporation, or you want to become a shareholder, which could be as cheap as a couple dollars, you could go to a shareholder meeting. And we're in a kind of weird situation now with the COVID stuff, but it used to be you owned one share of stock, you could go to a shareholder meeting, raise your issues with the CEO in front of not only his investors, but also his leadership. So in the case of the CNN issue, when I went in 2017, when I was having a back and forth with the CEO for over 10 minutes, his entire leadership staff, his board of directors, many of his vice presidents and presidents were sitting there listening to this going back and forth about the bias within the network and his commitment, he stated right there, to do better. But also, I mean, the media's there. There's lots of opportunities, and this is actually the one opportunity you have per year to actually raise some of these issues that you might not be able to get any audience for at any other time.
Now, are there other examples that you pursued? You've talked about AT&T and obviously there's a CNN subsidiary.
Sure. I mean, well, this year, one of our biggest ones was against Amazon, and it was even a little bit higher level. On top of just going to a shareholder meeting and asking a question of the leadership, if you own a certain amount of stock, and it's kind of a sliding scale now because the SEC has instituted new rules, but it used to be the level was $2,000, and it's still in some cases that way. We went to Amazon and we asked them to not be working with the Southern Poverty Law Center to determine who and who can't be a part of their Amazon Smile program. The Amazon Smile program is a charitable service where if you go to their website and you say Accuracy Media or the National Center for Public Policy Research, some other groups, if you're a nonprofit that fits their criteria, you can have a small portion of your Amazon dollars go as a donation to that group. But if you're the Alliance Defending Freedom, if you're the Family Research Council, if you're a number of other groups that are on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate list, you can end up not being able to use that program. So we put together a shareholder resolution that asked the company to dump the Southern Poverty Law Center from that honor, from that ability, from that power. And this proposal, because we got it on their proxy, went to every shareholder. So every shareholder, when you get that little packet in the mail saying, here comes our shareholder meeting, amongst all the other shareholder resolutions was ours there saying, let's have let's divorce ourselves from this radical left-wing group that has an axe to grind and puts upstanding groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom that argues in the Supreme Court of the United States of America, and the Family Research Council, which was actually the target of hate crimes, to allow them to get the same benefits that other organizations do. Now, we did not win that. It's hard to win a shareholder resolution, but still, that opens the door for negotiations. It puts the issue out there, and it really helps conservatives get a voice and get a footing back in this community that's becoming more and more toxic to us.
Hey, Dave, I want to say that's terrific, because since I've been around and watched my father fight these networks in particular and try to get shareholders resolutions, on there, it was an impossible task.
Oh yeah.
So that is a tremendous accomplishment from where I stand to get that there. That is a real tough battle, because they will nitpick, they will fight and scream and everything like that. They'll throw everything at you to try to prevent your resolution from getting on there. So that's great. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, even that Amazon Smile program, which can be a good program, my bone to pick with Amazon Smile would be, it's just that, they talk about this, how they're being charitable and how all this money goes to all these charities, but you still have, even as a buyer, as the consumer, you have to go through a few steps. You have to, every time, you have to actually go back and make sure you've signed on, and, and it says, your purchases are going there. It's not automatic every single time. I have to, in order to get any money to AIM or AIA or whatever, I have to redesignate that almost every time. I have to basically say, I'm doing these purchases under Smile. Otherwise, it's just, it's not there. But they give you this impression that there's this huge charity, that everything that people do, because they have that, everybody can do that, but you have to actually kind of redo this almost every single time. So it's not quite what the Amazon sells it to be in a lot of cases.
Not as altruistic as they say. Yeah.
It's 0.005%. So they're really giving away a lot there, right?
Yeah.
So you touched, Dave, about one of the challenges, which is that corporate America has been embracing, how shall I say, a woke agenda, and we see there, 3 people protest something and they immediately collapse and adopt something that, frankly, most of their customers, most of their shareholders wouldn't agree with. And sort of aside from all of this, I'm on a board, and as a result of that, I've participated in a number of the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors, which is corporate people. And as I've attended a lot of their functions in recent years, they have really moved over towards a very sort of woke agenda and have embraced a lot of, go down kind of litany, the sort of the list of issues. And it strikes me that for a lot of directors, there's really no path to be able to push back other than independently push back on some of the things that are being promoted.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the issues that we've been bringing up this year at board meetings. And that's that the boards itself are very liberal. And you're seeing just this week or last week, NASDAQ has decided that they want to push diversity, that you can't be on the NASDAQ stock exchange unless your board has certain intersectional members within it. So a woman, a minority, a gay person, that if you don't, you may not be able to be listed within NASDAQ. Now, that's something they have to submit to the SEC, and the SEC has to approve it, but it's felt that that's probably going to be kind of a rubber stamp. But the one thing that we've been bringing up is that if you've got a very liberal board, if you've got everyone that agrees with each other politically, then what's to stop you from potentially making mistakes? It's good to have diversity. If you want to have diversity in race, gender, sexual orientation, why don't you have it where it's really important in the opinions of both your employees and, in this case, your board? Have people that will talk to each other, that will raise questions, that will challenge each other. And so we have actually brought shareholder resolutions to boards and said, you should, when you're putting your boards together, look to see who is not necessarily a Republican, but who is a conservative, who has libertarian viewpoints, whatever. But if you get a bunch of people who think that they're liberal, who affiliate that way, and they're all that way, you're going to go down the wrong paths. Just like if you had an entirely conservative board, you risk going down some wrong paths. And it's amazing how many corporations fight us on this, when this is something that they should realize is a good thing, and it's something that they should have been doing in the first place.
Now, many of the groups or the search committees that are involved with identifying people to be on boards sort of take the posture that, as a general rule, they don't want people who are actively involved in politics, currently active. So sometimes they'll go with the various formers and people who are sort of at the end of their career. But that does create a challenge, because they do slip the bias in of under a number of categories where people are reflect this kind of, focus on climate change or whatever the sets of issue are. And it's interesting, one of the big controversies in the space has been the notion that corporate companies should no longer be primarily responsible to their shareholders, but therefore should be, how shall I say, should be engaged to the stakeholders, which is a term that this particular initiative that's, how shall I say, been advanced by the good and the great. I use that in a very general sense, but that has been advanced, that stakeholders is then defined in a very, very broad way, which then becomes the path in which sort of these other agenda items end up getting included.
Well, it upends the whole idea that we've been running corporations and stock and everything like that since at the beginning. I mean, what it was is a number of CEOs signed on to a letter that the Business Roundtable quarterbacked, and it said that they should be looking with it as a business community, we should be looking at the concerns of stakeholders. And then the question is, what's the definition of stakeholder? Well, it's the person who doesn't own stock. That's what it is. So you're opening up your meeting, you're opening up your agenda to the concerns of everybody, when the companies have a fiduciary duty to the investors, to the employees, to the customers. It shouldn't have its first or second priority be Greenpeace or whatever protesters out on the street saying you need to change what you're doing. And it's these kinds of external pressures that are going to hurt the profits, and that's going to hurt people's retirement savings. It's going to hurt the innovation for the company. It's going to hurt America in general if we're talking about something like an energy company. But
well, it's interesting because part of the challenge is, so if you push back on this, you get, but being responsive to broader stakeholder interests, that's in the interest of shareholders, or we've always done it because we're, part of the community, what have you. So then you say, well, okay, if that's always been the case, what the heck are you doing differently? Mm-hmm. Well, we're looking at a broader, community-wide perspective. And so there's, how shall I say, a little bait and switch, if you will, in the way this ends up getting defined. But I think you did a great job of describing what the real challenge is that, companies have an interest to their immediate stakeholder, which is shareholders, that isn't necessarily at conflict with employees or suppliers or what have you, but there's a primacy that exists for the shareholder interest that, again, the Business Roundtable, but this broader group of people are trying to undermine.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that you've got, and a lot of these companies to try to be a good corporate player or whatever, you've got like BlackRock. BlackRock is the largest investment company ever. And you would think that they could trade on that they could use that to be their own company. But instead, they've signed on to this whole idea of stakeholders. And at the very next shareholder meeting they had, the line of people who were asking questions were shareholders. But everything was, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this other thing. And it was just a litany of, you've given in once, now it's time to give in to all these other things. You've opened up Pandora's box. And we have found, when we've been talking to companies, that they realize they stepped in it when they signed this letter. Now they've opened it up to all sorts of complaints, and it's going to be hard to close that door again and get back to the business, and especially now with the change of administrations, to get back to their primary function, which is investors.
Back when my hair was black and I was at the very beginning of my career, I worked as a lawyer and research director for the New York State Controller. And in New York, they have a kind of unusual relationship in that the state controller is the sole trustee of the pension fund, the state public mm-hmm. employee pension fund, which is massive, hundreds of billions of dollars. And one of the perennial challenges, this was in the, I guess I'm dating myself, late 70s and into the 80s. One of the great challenges was always this effort to either get the pension fund to divest, or also sometimes to decide which position to take on shareholder issues. And that would be sometimes a source of conflict. And it was very interesting in that, which was that, and again, our state controller was Ned Regan, who's Republican, was pushed back very hard on that and said, look, my job is to the taxpayers and to the beneficiaries. But there's a very long-winded setup to say that it was fascinating that among the strongest advocates for that position, protecting that position, were the public employee unions that recognized that it was their members, their retirees, that whose interest was compromised potentially by if you decided not to basically use a fiduciary standard in investing. And very recently, the current controller in New York has backtracked. This is on divesting on fossil fuel companies. And it was, again, the public employee unions that pushed back and said, wait a second, you're hurting our members to be able to take that position.
That's interesting because a lot of the times the unions are the ones pushing a lot of these crazy.
Yeah, that's true. But when it's their money.
Yeah. But no, the New York Pension Fund, the CalPERS fund in California, I mean, a lot of public funds are being used on these shareholder resolutions, and the force of all that money behind it is very effective. We have been seeing another thing changing the focus a little bit are these proxy advisor services. These are the services that people actually pay for to tell them what to do. We read the proxies for you. We suss out these things so you don't have to. But the thing is, these services are left-wing. They're very left-wing, and they control about 95% of the proxy advisor market. So this year, the Trump administration, the Department of Labor, set up 2 new regulatory findings or rules that now these funds and asset managers can't be making decisions for people on their own. And if they're making decisions, if they're making opinions, they need to show what those opinions, why they base those opinions in this way, so that people can have more control and more information as to how their shares are being voted, and to potentially protest if they see that they're going in the wrong direction and it's not being done for the fiduciary responsibilities that they have towards their customers.
Hey, Dave, just from your experience, I mean, for shareholders, I mean, what's a percentage would you guess of shareholders that are actually aware of this wokeness, this left-wing, tendency on the part of these corporations that they have investments in, whether or not it's direct through stock ownership, that they own the shares directly, or whether or not they get them through an ETF or mutual fund?
Probably not a lot, especially when you're talking about mutual funds. I mean, people just, they don't really get that much information, and how many people, when they get those packages in the mail, throw them away. And as the years
sorry to say,
on,
full disclosure, right?
It used to be you'd get the whole book. You get the annual report, you get the proxy report, and you could look through and see, oh, here's all these things that are happening. Oh, who's been appointed to the board and who's up for renewal. A lot of people, if they don't throw those away, now they don't get those. They just get a little card saying, oh, if you want to go to our website and download a 50-page document and read through that on your computer screen, sure, you can go to that.
Or you can opt out from your broker, I think, too.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I think you can even opt out. I don't even think I get much material. I think I may have said, no to something, and it's all of a sudden it's like I get like nothing.
Oh, wow. Well, we set something up this year called the Investor Value Voter Guide, so that people who are interested can go and see Nike's going to talk about this. Honeywell is going to talk about this. And we can't check everyone out because there are so many, but we find the ones that we believe are most important, in this case, to people who are conservative and people of faith, to show where they need to be concerned, where abortion's on the agenda, where faith is on the agenda, where we might have something about diversity in thought and opinion on the board, where that stuff is coming up. So we're definitely trying to educate people more, but you're right. I don't think a lot of people notice these things at all. And a lot of times, I mean, it's not something that even the business reporters report on.
Yeah.
So tell me some of the initiatives. I'm actually thinking, do you got one for BlackRock?
At BlackRock's meeting this year, before we get into this, I can tell you we've had some problems this year because of COVID. It used to be we could go to a shareholder meeting and it would be various places.
Right.
Sometimes they would have it by their corporate headquarters or in their corporate headquarters, or some company like Disney, they'll have it at a different place every year. But we'd go to the meetings, we would sit by the microphone, and we would try and ask our question. And usually we were pretty darn good at that. This year, because of COVID, everything started to go virtual after a while. And so you had companies that would be in total control. You could submit a question through a portal, and they would maybe paraphrase it, maybe they'd read it completely. Sometimes they actually did. Sometimes they would just ignore you. And like in my case, I went virtually to 3 airline shareholder meetings, United, American, and Delta, with the intention in each one of those meetings to ask, why are you caving to the animal rights activists and not allowing lab animals to be transported on your jets? In the time of COVID, this would be a good idea, because the animal rights activists, of course, were opposed to the monkeys that were being used and successfully in England for research. Why can't we bring them here? Why can't you do that? Why do you have to give in to the animal rights activists on this important issue? Every meeting I was ignored. My question was ignored. And in the case of Delta, it accidentally slipped onto the agenda, and the CEO, who successfully answered questions about pension plans and buyouts and Black Lives Matter, when he was presented with this animal rights, why are you caving to the animal rights people, said, oh, I don't know about that. I'll get to that later. We'll put it on our website. They never did. Never did. So, I mean, they're taking advantage of the virtual meeting format to not answer questions, but in some places they are. And so it's still good for us to go to these meetings, and especially good for us to push these proposals, which are, as Don said, a big labor intensive thing for us to get on.
You know, to follow up on that, Dave, the thing here is that, you know, what do you expect, or what are you predicting with these shareholder meetings going forward? Because to me, to a certain extent, a lot of them are saying like, oh, shoot, you know, we can do this virtually. It's kind of like people where they're working from home, a lot of other things that have happened as a result of COVID. Will they return to the old way of doing things? But, you know, now that they have this control mechanism, they don't have to worry about the kind of the Reed Irvines of the past or the Evelyn Y. Davises of the past. They can now say, we can now pick and choose. You know, the National Press Club has always been famous. If you want to ask a question in the National Press Club at a lot of those newsmaker things in the past, you always had to submit the question on a card. And so they could selectively choose what to ask and what not to ask, right? So, you know, do you think a lot of these guys are going to return? You think some of them are just going to say, no, we love this. This is how it's going to be from now till whenever.
They say they want to go back to in-person meetings, but I can't imagine that they don't love it. Because like you said, and like I was talking about, I mean, they have more control than ever before. And we've complained about this to the SEC. We've complained about it to the companies. And I think it falls on deaf ears because, like you said, they control the room. And actually, we started this on the case of BlackRock. With BlackRock, as I mentioned before, they had a whole slew of people that they did allow to ask questions that were angry, left-wing, woke questions that were pushing the company to the left. When our question was, why are you doing business with China? Why are you compromising our national security by working with China? They didn't let us ask that question. So, I mean, we tried to make a big deal out of it. We did some media on it, but Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, who may have a lot of influence in the incoming Biden administration, he ducked our question. And it's a very important question that we're going to probably hear a lot about over the next 4 years. Yeah, they ducked that, and it's unfortunate. I think we're going to see that kind of stuff because we have had situations, especially like in Disney. Our director, Justin Danoff, has had to finagle his way to the microphone year after year, including 1 year when they put the microphone in within the Disney fan club. And one of the Disney fans actually felt sorry for Justin and let him in to ask the question. And I believe that's the one that led to Joy Behar having to make a public apology for calling Christians crazy and Mike Pence crazy. So, I mean, it's important that people like us, not necessarily us, but someone like us, to get into these meetings and to be able to ask questions like that.
David, how about earnings calls? Have you ever gotten on those?
I don't know if we're allowed to be on. I've listened to earnings calls,
Right.
but I don't know if we're allowed to participate in earnings calls because we're not one of these investment companies.
Right. So they're able to screen and pick who participates.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a long running back and forth with Ed Stack, the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods, about their decision not to sell guns when they're a sporting goods company. And the money that they lost and the employees that they lost and the customers that won't go to their store anymore. And so I did listen into a number of their earnings calls and used to write press releases and blog posts after those earnings calls saying, haha, I was right. But I never was a participant in those calls, but most companies, if not all companies, do make those things available. So as an investor, you can listen into them, and the questions are very interesting.
Quick question about, we're certainly going to have a lot of pushback we're already leading into the Biden administration, but with the Green New Deal and climate change as an emphasis to demonize fossil fuel and fossil fuel companies. How do you see that all playing out?
Well, I'd like to put some CEOs on the hot seat about that kind of thing, because I know that we've dealt with some energy companies in the past that think it's okay to give in to these people or to throw them a bone. As I mentioned, shareholder resolutions are hard to get past. I mean, like in the case of Facebook, you're never going to win because Mark Zuckerberg owns over 50% of the stock. But in other and also you've got these proxy advisors with a lot of money behind them, a lot of shares behind them. But it used to be that shareholder resolutions hardly got over 5%, maybe 10%. But I went to a local energy company shareholder meeting a couple years back, intending to speak against a left-wing shareholder resolution, and I got pulled aside and said, "Oh, that got settled." And I'm like, "Why did you settle this?" It was about renewable energy and the company's commitment to renewable energy. And they said, "Oh, we didn't think that we were going to win." They thought that there were enough of these proxy advisor services that had it in for them. And so they gave up. And nowadays we're seeing more and more of these coalitions coming together and these proxy advisor services being active, so that there are shareholder resolutions that are passing. And so as we go into an era with the Green New Deal being a more likely possibility, I'd hope that some of these companies would be more defensive. But we do have a problem, and to kind of change the topic a little bit, about the way the workforce is being brought into the process as a member of the left-wing movement. We kind of call it an attack on three levels. First of all, you've got the very liberal boards of directors. So that's the top down. Then you have the outside in, which would be groups like left-wing groups like Greenpeace and other investor groups, all these left-wing investor areas. And then you've got the bottom up, the employees, the liberal woke workforce, the kids that just came out of college that are indoctrinated by their professors. And the companies that now are thinking it's too important to lose these people. So they will give in to their employees rather than go to what their investors are asking for and the profits and the customers. So we have to deal with that kind of thing as well. And when we're talking about the Green New Deal, that may be a factor that we really need to contend with.
You know, I mean, from a perspective of the individual investor, though, you know, one of the problems I see is just that they're, it's you, it's me, or whatever. There's a bunch of us scattered all over the country. I mean, we've got a lot of conservatives, but we own, a small percentage of shares. But as you said, we're now going up, for a shareholders resolution for any real corporate influence on policy. We're going up against the CalPERS of the world and the big institutional investors like BlackRock that control just a ton of shares. What is an individual investor to do?
Well, it's amazing it's almost a David and Goliath kind of situation where we can win. Because a lot of the times we see this a lot in the media with Fox News. Someone on the Fox network says something controversial, Media Matters and all these other groups ally together, and they suddenly start a tweet storm at Fox saying, you got to fire Tucker because he said such and such about so-and-so. Those things do get counted. And so if Acme Widget Company does something woke that we don't like, if we were to suddenly get a group of people to tweet about Acme Widget Company, to call their corporate office, to send letters to the CEO, things like that, we may get them to change. The one thing that companies don't like is bad press. And if we, even a small amount of people, because I don't think all that many people actually complain to Fox News advertisers. I think it's the Fox News advertisers get a couple, they freak out, they think it's a harbinger of something bigger, and they flee. So if we were to do the same kind of thing, we could hopefully see the same kind of results. And I know there's a lot of people say, well, I'll just boycott. I won't use those services. Well, I mean, with Nike shoes, sure, I don't need to buy Nike anymore. But I like carbonated soda. I can't, if I want to be a good conservative, I can't drink Coke, I can't drink Pepsi. Dr. Pepper's kind of iffy, but you can't really engage in society with all these companies if you're going to boycott all these companies. So it's better to engage and try to get them to change that way and even if that means like going to your local McDonald's and complaining to the manager there, he's going to probably pass it up the line, and they'll eventually hear that kind of thing. Organize your friends and boycott Target if you don't like their bathroom policy. That will end up going to corporate, and that may change it just by your one protest, because corporations are sometimes scared that way.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think we've seen that for a long time. I mean, if you go back to the old American Family Association days with Don Wildman, and he created this 32-page newsprint paper, basically, and they cross-referenced advertisers and products. And if you had a complaint like on 60 Minutes or whatever, you could theoretically say, oh, here's the Heinz ketchup, here's what it is, here's how I contact them to say I'm protesting like that. It kind of goes back to even what AIM did with, throwing the postcards into the newsletter that we used to do all the time, and doing it, as you said. These corporations, they don't like any of this. I mean, I still remember United Parcel Service, which is not, which was at that time a privately held company, not a publicly held company. I still remember getting a call from their corporate office because of the Alar stuff on 60 Minutes. And this guy from PR calls, he said, we don't know who you guys are, but we got like thousands of postcards and we need to know more.
There we go.
Right. So this does work. I mean, and this is one of my concerns, I think, generally, is that a lot of people think, oh, we're fighting this, an Amazon, this, multi-billion-dollar corporation or whatever. How are we going to be able to affect it? Well, if you take that attitude, you're not. But if you think you can do something, you go out and you do it. It's amazing what a bunch of people could. But even 10 people can have an influence because they don't like it. You didn't have to get a lot of postcards into the corporations like Walmart or whatever. The fact that you'd get them just sometimes would just scare the living daylights out of them. We don't want to lose sales, so let's talk to them potentially. I think the left sometimes is just better organized, has kind of laid this out a little bit better to fight back on this. Conservatives are a little bit more loosely affiliated. If we marshal the resources a little bit better, I think we can be a little more effective in fighting the left in some of these policies.
Yeah, I mean, we want to live our lives. We want to go home at night and be with our families and things like that and enjoy ourselves. The left is constantly operating. And so, yeah, they're sending out tweets left and right. I mean, they coordinate their actions too. We need to be like that, and it's just being engaged, and it is the most important part, because these companies, if they don't hear from us, they're going to assume that we're there. They'll come back no matter what. But if they realize that we're going to continue to be in their face about it while we're maybe still going to their stores, then they're gonna take notice.
Something that I'm thinking about with all of this, I mean, maybe this is a little bit of a silver lining with this, with the COVID and the shareholders meetings being electronic, is that talking, getting the word out to supporters of your organization and, AIM and whatever other conservative organizations, to say, look, if you own stock, or you're part of the mutual fund, ETF, whatever it is, and that, what you own has a share or whatever shares of the Nikes of the world, the Starbucks, the Amazons. If you're getting the shareholder materials, I'm assuming that as a shareholder, you're getting a link to that meeting, to when the shareholders meeting is, so you participate, right?
Yeah.
So why not create a movement to get these people, the conservatives, to start listening in and watching? I mean, one of the issues would have been, as you had kind of alluded to earlier, was that these meetings go on all over the country. The Washington Post would always hold it in their headquarters. So that was like a slam dunk for us being in DC. But a lot of the corporations move them around the country to make them accessible to the Western group or the Southern group or the, whatever, so people in those parts of the country. But if they're doing it virtually, why can't we not mobilize conservatives who have shares to say, get that link, listen in, and submit questions? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, can you imagine if we got conservatives to kind of just like flood their portal with these questions or something?
Oh, exactly. And the thing is, even if they ignore all those questions, they're going to see all those questions. And afterwards, they're going to say, we got 10 questions about XYZ. And they're going to be like, ooh, okay. And you could even call, if you wanted to, if you're tenacious about it, you could call, they all have investor relations departments. Call investor relations and say, why didn't you answer my question? Can you answer it subsequently? I'd still like to hear it. Those kinds of things. I mean, you can call at any time. And something I wanted to mention before and didn't. If you're with an organization, send them a rating, just like people do congressional ratings. Do a rating of corporations. Corporations have departments that work on these kinds of things. And you can ask them what their policies are, and if they have opinions. And if they can tell you, then you can rate them on it. And you can say, don't go to XYZ because they don't have our values. Don't go to ABC, or go to ABC because they do. And corporations will take account of that as well, because then they don't necessarily know who you're telling. And if it's online, then you're telling everybody.
All right. Well, we've reached the end of the show. We've hit 8:15, which I believe is our end time. Dave, thanks for joining us. Where can people learn more about what you guys are doing?
Go to our website. The Free Enterprise Project is part of the National Center for Public Policy Research, which is www.nationalcenter.org.
All right, Dave, thank you for joining us. Good to see you. It's been a while since we last talked.
Yeah, good to see each other again.
Yeah, and for everybody out there, thank you for joining us for Direct Line. We will be back again next Wednesday.